2 years ago, Britain learned of a practice known as debanking, when an individual, organisation or business has its bank account closed, suspended or refused by a financial institution, often without explanation or evidence of impropriety. Debanking became a national scandal in 2023 when Nigel Farage was told his accounts would be closed, shortly after which a leaked dossier confirmed this was because of his political views. Now, Mr Farage has warned that debanking is damaging enterprise, trust and free speech, following research by the Prosperity Institute, which speaks of a debanking epidemic. We saw it when the Reverend Richard Fothergill had his bank account shut down after he criticised his bank's obsession with pride. The Prosperity Institute also reports that 3/4 of new start-up defence-related businesses cannot access banking services. A gender-critical parents group was debanked. This scandal needs to stop. Yet Britain is in the midst of a free speech crisis, and when banks shut people out of the financial system for their beliefs, I think they are undermining the foundations of a free society. Freedom of association is meaningless if people can't pay for the organisation that you need, and they can't do that if they cannot access a bank account and are effectively erased from the economy because of their views. Of course, banks are businesses, and they should be entitled a wide degree of business autonomy when deciding whom to take on as clients. Coutts, for example, or Hawes, has very clear guidelines on the amount of capital a client needs to own in order to open an account. But the major clear oak banks do not, and they must apply their criteria equally and fairly to all users. Accounts are closed for all sorts of legitimate reasons: anti-money laundering practices, risk assessment, counter-terrorism, sanctions, and even low profitability prospects. However, nearly 500,000 people were debanked last year, according to figures from the Financial Conduct Authority. When campaigners against grooming gangs are vickered, offence innovators, and politicians face financial exclusion, it becomes an industry-wide problem that we must stop. If the United Kingdom is to remain a country of liberty and fairness, these practices, however prevalent, must end. Debanking is censorship by stealth and a threat to your freedom. As always, let me know what you think. mailmog@gbnews.com. Well, I'm joined now by the Senior Researcher on Financial Freedoms at the Prosperity Institute, James Graham. James, thank you for coming in.
We're living in a time of what feels like pretty significant social change, and it makes us question things that we've even taken for granted for decades. And one of those at the moment that people are wondering about is actually money. Is the money in your bank account safe? Should you be investing elsewhere? Are we looking at a potential global crash? What will it mean for your savings? Is there a way that you could be using your money that might be outside of government control even? Well, TallyMoney is potentially one solution. So I'm delighted to say that I'm joined today by the CEO and founder of TallyMoney, Cameron Parry. What is TallyMoney?
Well, at TallyMoney, you basically get gold you can spend. So we give people an individual account in their name, everyday account. They get a sort code and account number. They use that account just like they would pounds from their bank, but it's milligrams of gold that we brand as Tally.
Okay. Why would you do that, though? What is the benefit to the customer instead of just having a normal pound sterling account?
Gold's performance against the pound is above 11% per annum over the last 25 years on average. But we still need money in our daily lives, and we have savings. We know that it's good common sense and prudent to save up for things, not just live in credit. You know, whether it's a holiday or a rainy day, your retirement planning, you need to have money in your life, basically, that you can rely on, that's dependable, that nobody meddles with, that nobody can weaponise against you, which is another element of government control when it's the government currency, which we could talk about another time. And it should be pretty simple and straightforward, and that's what we deliver at Tally. And really, we just want people to feel safe and happy with their money. There was a time when the bigger your bank balance, the more confident you felt. Now it's like, I need to do something with it. I can't leave it there. In Tally, you can.
Okay, brilliant. Cameron Parry from TallyMoney, thank you so much.
Thank you, Bev.
First of all, what is the size of this problem?
Thank you for having me, Jacob. The size of this problem is huge. Last year in the United Kingdom, 500,000 people, just under that, were debanked. The real number is probably much, much higher. The problem is complex. A lot of it is driven by financial regulation, which actually costs the banks 30 billion a year. And the banks are often just trying to reduce their costs by debanking customers.
But just give me an idea of the financial risks. Do you know how many people are involved in money laundering who get prosecuted every year? How many people are involved in terrorism? Does it begin to get anywhere close to 500,000 people?
It doesn't. Debanking is an attack on the British people. These regulations I mentioned increased massively in 2017. Since that time, we know that money laundering has actually increased, not decreased, as the number of people being debanked has increased significantly. The burden of proof needs to be on the people debanking.
But if you're saying to me that people are debanked because to keep their bank account open is so administratively expensive that they're a cost to the bank, actually that's reasonable, isn't it? You can't expect banks to lose money on small customers. And this needs regulatory change. This is an FCA problem, not a commercial banking problem.
There are two sides of the coin. We have clear evidence that banks have leveraged the current regulations and weaponized them to discriminate against people whose views they don't agree with. And we saw that clearly with Nigel Farage. We've also seen it with gender-critical groups, etc. But yes, what you say is correct. And we do need regulatory change rapidly.
To what extent are private companies free to decide who they do business with? That if I were to set up the Papist Bank, could I say I'm only having customers who accept the authority of Holy Mother Church, and that I won't have people from other religions, and that is my decision as a commercial decision? Or would that be, in your view, an improper discrimination?
Interesting question. I'm not sure how many customers you would have. I hope it would be many. I think that businesses should be free to do whatever they want within reason, but we are a country of free speech, and the reality is that banks are limited by liability. So ultimately, their losses will be paid for by the taxpayer if they fail, as they have done in the past.
And that's the key point, isn't it, Kevin? That the big banks are too big to fail. We saw in 2008-9 that they were effectively arms of the state. And therefore, if the state is taking away banking facilities from people who have controversial views, that's very undesirable.
Well, a couple of things, Jacob. You said at the start of this discussion about there is no free speech. There's a free speech crisis in the UK, and I would have to take issue with you. I feel we've never had more vigorous debate in this country. If you saw Nigel's show earlier, if you heard Keir Starmer's speech, I think free speech is alive and well. And I think it's fair to point out that the institution that produced this report today is funded, is it by Legatum? Is that right? They're one of the major funders of it. And they're a
funder of GB News.
And they're
a major investor of GB News, which I'll be declaring later.
Right.
Yes.
So what viewers and listeners need to know is that that there is a worldview, an agenda behind this research, which is basically purporting that there are forces at play here seeking to shut down free speech by these removal of banking facilities. Now, I would agree, because so I think we have to contextualise this research. There is an issue with all of us have felt as people or as businesses in recent years that if you have to move money from A to B, has it ever been more difficult, right? The regulation involved in banking is wrong. Banks have made extortionate profits of late. Okay, and yet they don't feel like they're serving us. And that's why you probably haven't heard that one of the things Keir Starmer said to a room full of business executives this week is he's asked every government department to find 25% in red tape reduction because of this kind of stuff. But do I think, I said on this channel it was wrong what happened to Nigel and Coutts Bank, and people there paid the price. In fact, the CEO, as I recall, left the building.
West was fired.
Indeed. So, but, is it as dark and mysterious? I think as some of the vibes here, I don't think so. And if you want to set up a bank for Catholics, just to put that into normal person's language, Jacob, you go for it.
Excellent. Well,
I'm in.
Excellent. Well, perhaps you'll become my first customer.
Yeah.
But I want to come back to the regulatory side of this, because the money laundering regulations clearly do not work.
Agreed.
That the authorities get thousands and thousands of bogus complaints because if you are in the financial services world, you want to tell somebody in authority because then you're clear.
Yeah.
And if you don't, you get years in prison. And therefore, the slightest thing leads to an unnecessary complaint, which is then never investigated. But it makes the whole financial system very stodgy. Isn't that where we need fundamental reform?
Yes, we do need reform there. It is a huge issue that there's an over-reporting of AML, anti-money laundering risk. The problem is that these regulations highlight things as risks, which aren't necessarily risks. So, for example, inconsistent payments for a banking customer flags them to be a high risk. They need enhanced due diligence. But the reality is, many people watching GB News, plumbers, electricians, they get paid in cash on a job-by-job basis. Yet, according to the regulations, they are high risk, which means they often get debanked. And if you add into that support for a right-wing political party, disaster.
And you're running a campaign on this. What is your campaign trying to do?
Yes, we are. So you mentioned that the bank which debanked Nigel Farage rightly answered for what they did. Our campaign is trying to tell the stories of the debanked. So we are an online campaign. If you go to prosperity.com, individuals and businesses, they can fill out their experience. They can tell their debanking story. And our campaign will then shine a spotlight on the banks and on the regulators using these stories.
I will confess, I banked with Coots for, I think, 43 years and always found them absolutely marvellous. So if my bank manager is watching, thank you very much. James Graham works for the Prosperity Institute. The Prosperity Institute is owned by the Garton Group. The group is also one of the leading investors in the holding company of GB News. And a spokesman from UK Finance has previously said banks must comply with strict legal and regulatory requirements. A small proportion of accounts are closed, but only after extensive review and investigation. The main reasons are financial crime or fraud concerns, being unable to complete customer due diligence, or an account being dormant. Well, thank you very much to James and to Kevin.